Hi, friend. This is Alex McRobbs, founder of the Mindful Life Practice, and you're listening to the Sober Yoga Girl podcast. I'm a Canadian who moved across the world to the Middle East at age 23, and I never went back. I got sober in 2019, and I now live full-time in Bali, Indonesia. I've made it my mission to help other women around the world stop drinking, start yoga, and change their lives through my online Sober Girls Yoga community. You're not alone, and a sober life can be fun and fulfilling. Let me show you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl podcast. I'm sitting here today with my psychic healer, Dan, who many of you know from, he's been on Instagram Live with me several times. We've done quite a few episodes together, but just to recap, in case this is the first one that you're listening to, Dan and I met in 2019. And he predicted that I would basically be doing what I am doing with my life now. So he predicted that I would start a retreat space and be leading yoga retreats all around the world, the Mindful Life Practice, and here we are. It's pretty amazing. So highly recommend that you check out and potentially book a session with him because he's just phenomenal. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great. It feels good. I think every time that you and I decide to do a podcast, that there's a lead to the podcast, like things just keep on happening around us that lead us to what we've decided maybe a month ago or a few weeks ago to talk about. And it's very insightful and interesting for me to say that, and it's not a predictive thing from my point of view either, that I've predicted that this is what we need to talk about. It just comes out in conversation. I think the conversation of doing something that we're going to speak about today came off of one of our Insta Live conversations, and we said, yes, this would be a great topic to talk about. But what are we talking about today, Alex?
So today we're going to be talking about the experience of grief.
Yeah, I kind of feel that there's not, this conversation of grief or grieving isn't out there, and it's hard for a lot of people to have that kind of support they need around that period. And it's not only about grieving a loved one or a job, but also maybe grieving parts of yourself that you had to let go of, or trauma that you had to let go of. The grieving process is something that we kind of have fear, and we kind of get overwhelmed with the grieving process. So I think today's conversation is going to be more about how we're supposed to use that grieving process and kind of think about it more like a power and more like a push to go towards another journey or towards another feeling within ourselves. But the grieving process never ends. It's a part of our DNA. We're always going to have to grieve about something. But if we can start looking at that grieving process differently and understanding it, we probably do a lot of justice emotionally and mentally to ourselves. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my last few weeks, I was just speaking to Alex about this. The last few weeks, I had a couple of my friends go through grief in the sense of the physical form. Their father passed away, and it was interesting to see that everybody's father was passing away. It was just 4 people in a row that their father passed away. Some of them from old age, some of them from a disease, some of them from just a stroke, or a very powerful stroke. And it made me start thinking about the grief that I've gone through and the way that I dealt with it. Because I remember that when I was going through my traumatic phase of my life, and I was going through this healing phase, all of a sudden, my father went into the hospital. And then he just was in the hospital for like 3 months, but he also went into a coma. And then that's when everything started snowballing for me. And I actually didn't allow myself to feel anything. The moment we found out he was in a coma, I didn't actually allow myself to feel that information that was coming to me and feel it emotionally. I went on the defensive and I was like pointing finger and yelling at the doctor and like, how is this possible? Why didn't we know this? Whereas my mother stood there and she started crying. She was devastated. She allowed herself to be devastated. I didn't allow myself to be devastated. I allowed myself to say, hey, my human instinct is to now be protective and be strong and find out answers and do all this stuff. And I didn't allow myself to feel the emotional, deep emotional side of it. And then my father eventually passed away. And that process of seeing him pass was very, very traumatic for me and my family. And I don't think we dealt with it the right way, though we had kindred spirits around us, family members around us that really uplifted us by doing insane things just to change our mindset or our feelings. And it really did help us, but I never grieved my father. And the interesting thing is, I think it's been about 19 years since my father's passed, and I actually grieved him last year. I actually felt what I needed to feel 18 years ago last year. And I went through that process of grief, allowing myself to cry, allowing myself to get to the emotional feeling of that loss. Because I always sensed the loss of him, but I didn't feel, I felt that emptiness. And that emptiness stays with us because the person's not there. But that emptiness, I didn't allow that emptiness to show its feeling. I didn't allow it to come into me. And I think it was a day, and he was really on my mind. And I also grieved him. I was missing him. I also ordered his favorite foods for dinner that night just to say, okay, you know what? I need to do something to not change my grief, but to say, hey, I wanted to be a part of this day with me. So the interesting thing about this is, Alex, which maybe not a lot of people know, and I think we've spoken about it a couple times, but what my father's passing and the grief that he didn't feel from that gave birth to the healer that I am today. It was that moment that I became a healer. I wasn't just a person that was doing predictive readings for people, but I decided that life decided, I didn't even decide, that I would become a healer because everything was at the lowest level for me. Losing a father, having these other traumatic feelings, be it about self-confidence, about myself, even work. I walked off of work. I walked off of a job that I would never have done this. And it all kind of happened right before I became 30. And I was just like, there has to be a better way. That's my journey of grief that happened back then. But it's not something that only happened once. I had to grieve many times before my father's passing about other family members, be it grandparents. And just recently in the last 3 years, my mom's mom, my nanny, she passed away, and I was the closest with her. And I also had to figure out, why wasn't I sensing her? Why wasn't I allowing myself to have a grieving process? And then I also felt that I didn't need a grieving process for her because I made amends with myself about her passing. And I also didn't, I did something which was shocking to my family, was, so she passed in Toronto and I was in India. And I decided at that moment that I didn't want to go see her corpse. I didn't want to go to a funeral and that being the last image that I would see of her. I wanted to live in that light of her life. And even though she was in the hospital the last time I saw her, she was talking to me, she laughed, she joked, but I want to remember that as the last image just for her. because it was something that I couldn't handle that. So I decided that I'm not going to give I don't want to give myself an imprint of an image that I don't think I could handle. So I said, I'm going to just walk away from that and not go. My family was very surprised when I didn't go. And I explained it to them when I went, and I told them the same thing. I said, the last image I want to have is of her life. I don't want to have it of death. And we focus on that. We focus on that final moment. And that's the problem. The problem is we don't focus on the life of the person, and we don't focus on what was the amazingness of that person or what they went through or what they did with you. And also the emotional highs that we've gone through with that person, or even the emotional lows we've gone with that person, honoring that person. So the last few weeks for me, speaking to clients and speaking to friends about grief, I said a few things. The first thing was that when people come to console you, they may not have the right words to express themselves. That isn't because they've not gone through grief. It's just because they just don't know how to express in the love language that you need to hear at that moment. And it's okay. So don't feel off about it. Allow them to say what they have to say. They may not be politically correct. They may say things like, you'll feel better, things will change, you'll get over this. And those are things that kind of could trigger you, right? Because you're like, why? I mean, what do you mean I'll get over this? What do you mean I'll feel better? And it kind of snowballs into other areas of your life. And that instead of taking everybody at word value of what they say, because they may not be able to articulate exactly what to say to you, the best thing to do is hear them, give them kindness, and give them the love. And then afterwards, you may get a couple of people who would be very soul connected with you, who can speak the love language that you need to hear. Reach out to them, be with them, speak to them. But what's worked for me over the last 3 decades has been about talking about the happy moments that I spent with the person and what they used to do and how they used to talk, and what their favorite foods were, what their favorite movies were, what their favorite songs were. As I keep on saying, music is the most powerful way that you could heal yourself also. But I also feel that when I hear music that represents a certain person that's not here anymore, it makes me feel nostalgic, and maybe it could also make me feel a little bit um, not sad but melancholy. Like I feel like and it's a sweet sadness. Let's put it that way. A sweet sadness that comes to me, and I feel that, but I allow myself to feel it, and I don't shun it away. I don't turn off the radio when that song comes, or I won't eat those certain foods because it reminds me of my father or my grandparents. I embrace it. And I kind of feel that that embracing of what you're going through, we kind of run away from it because we're fearful of it. We're scared. We're scared to feel sad. We're scared to cry. Especially when it comes to things like work, or it comes to things like there's certain aspects of us that we have to forget about, or we'll have to not we have to grieve. And when I talk about grieving ourselves, is sometimes from a soul level we eliminate or take away a pattern, or we declutter a pattern or a certain thing. When we go through that, it's kind of hard for the soul sometimes to let go also. It's definitely hard for the mind to let go, but the soul sometimes has problems to let go too, because the soul from an emotional point of view feels like it's getting overwhelmed. From your mind or your logical mind, or your this being the masculine, this being the feminine, that the masculine side of you would be like, I need to be strong. I need to control. I have to be there. And the feminine side of yourself is, I need to cry. I need to let go. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling pain. But this is also the side that will give you laughter, love, and joy. And this is also the side that will say, hey, you are going to be okay. So there's a balance that happens between the two of them. But what happens with us when our soul feels like, we're reprogramming our soul or remaking our soul feel like, okay, we got to let go of this. Could be something like grieving addiction, could be like uh, uh, grieving things that you keep on craving that probably are not good for you. That grief process also is very hard for us to say, okay, it's hard for people to cut cold turkey, if that makes sense to people, like just stop automatically and not feel anything. We're humans, we feel everything, we sense everything, our ego gets affected, everything gets affected. So when we're going through this process, that grief that we have to go through from that, which is more of an emotional, internal grief, if we allow ourselves to feel it and ride that wave, and some of us will get extremely emotional and cry maybe for 4 or 5 hours, and the tears won't stop. Don't stop the tears. Allow the floodgates to happen. While that's happening, you're supposed to now, when we're grieving a part of ourselves, rejoice on the parts that are growing. Rejoice on the parts that are new. Rejoice on every other element about you. Look at that. Pinpoint that, even in the tears. So the tears could come down, but you could be smiling about other aspects of yourself. When people ask me if I would change the outcome of what happened to my father, I would say 100% I would. But I kind of also feel that 100% that that was the thing that pushed me towards my healing, and said that was his gift. His gift to me when he left was to say, hey, you're going to be going beyond what you're doing right now. And this is as as I as my death is happening, I'm also giving birth to you again as a new person. And that's when the healer was born. And I didn't think about this till recently. This ideology or this thought process about my father's death gave birth to me, the healer, was something that just happened over the last couple of months. That I was like, that's actually what happened. But does this make does this idea of grief becoming something more than just grief? Does that make sense to you, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the evolution of, like, I think of some of the biggest transformations in my life, and they happened after a grief journey. But it was not for me grief of, I haven't lost, I have lost loved ones like most people have, but for me, it's been grandparents who it's been the end of their life. It's a little bit different than when you had a death of like someone very close to you and someone very sudden. So I don't think that I've had a grief, um a really impactful grief experience around death of someone close to me. But what I feel the grief that I've gone through is like the ending of a really close relationship, whether it's like a partner or a friendship. And then the grieving experience of all of that often gives birth to a new beginning. And I have been going through a form of grief like that recently because the mindful life practice, the thing about running this community is that it keeps, when you run a community for the long term, you see generations of people coming in and out of the community. And that doesn't mean that I have failed as a community leader. What it means is that people have learned what they needed to learn and they're ready for the next learning and the next chapter of their journey. But me grasping that, first of all, was really hard at the beginning. And I thought every time people cycled in and out, it meant that I failed. But what's been happening right now is that there's just been a big generation that's been with me for 3 years. And what's special about them is that we went through the whole lockdown together. So we got very, very, very close on Zoom in that time. And we were all processing that. And a lot of those people are evolving into like incredible things. Like a lot of them trained as yoga teachers with me, and now they're teaching in studios in their communities. It's amazing. And so it means it's time for the next mindful life practice generation of people to come in, who they're all coming in now. They're all my new students. But I have been processing that grief right now, actually, as certain people go. And it makes me so sad. But I know that it's like a new beginning for both of us, right? It's a new beginning for me as a teacher, as a leader, as the starter of this retreat center. It's a new beginning for them to have a new challenge as yoga teachers. And so that's something that I've been experiencing related to grief.
Well, I because you and I have worked together for such a long time now, and I've been part of your journey, that I do feel there's been um, a different form of grief for you, especially when you left um, aspect of you that was very toxic, and you went to, and the journey of sobriety happened for you, and then that you understood that you had to grieve that old self, old person of yourself, right? The old person that would probably party and probably consume things that you shouldn't have consumed. All that things. That was one thing. The other thing is, I remember when Alex was going to do the big transition from leaving the Middle East and going to um, Asia, Indonesia. She had to really think about that because it was a big step and a new journey, and it was hard for her. So she had to grieve also the aspect of having security, grieving the aspect of having a home, friends, everything that she knew, and saying, hey, I'm starting off brand new with a new slate without knowing anybody there. So she had to go through that. Not that she's going to never speak to those people, but that was a version of herself back then that she didn't even realize. If we took Alex back to that time, she was excited, but there's a sense of fear also. But the fear was good. It was good to feel that. But that was also, she was a teacher for so many years to understand that that wasn't her calling and that wasn't her thing. An uh, uh, being a primary school teacher is what I'm talking about, but not a yoga teacher. So people are clear, because she does still teach yoga. Yeah. But being a primary school teacher, that it wasn't part of her life purpose, and she had to grieve that teacher, because that primary school teacher was Alex. Alex was that for so many years, but she's letting go that it was almost like she was a caterpillar when she was a primary school teacher. And then when she came and decided that I'm going to start the mindful life practice and I'm going to start this thing, she emerged and gave birth to the butterfly. So it's kind of the same situation. I'm kind of putting it into what I've also gone through, but all of us do have this. And sometimes a lot of us don't, because we don't look at other aspects while we're grieving. And then we make the grief the biggest thing and the topmost on the priority list. I know people who are grieving loved ones or family members or husbands or wives or children or whatever it is, or pets, that they're grieving, and it's been such a hard process, and it's been years, and they haven't got it. They haven't given the right type of energy to themselves, not to get over it. The grief is there. Grief isn't going anywhere. If anybody's listening to this, one thing I can tell you is grief is part of us, and we will never let go of grief. Grief is going to be there. It's the way that we think about grief, and the way that we therapeutically, emotionally give ourselves the type of love and the type of kindness we need in order to say, let the grief be with me, but I also am going to uplift myself and also say, hey, grief, you're not an evil thing. You're not a sad thing. just a part of life. We all have to go through it. Um, I had a client, and during COVID, she lost her husband, and she had a daughter. I think her daughter was all of 3 when this has happened, and she had to come and tell her daughter that her father wasn't there anymore. And the daughter went to the mom, hugged her, and said, "It's okay, mom. Dad's in heaven. He'll be taken care of."
Wow.
And this is a 3-year old saying this to a 30-year old,
Wow.
mid 30. And that that just changed everything for this woman to say she was worried about what she had to tell her daughter, and her daughter was the wisdom that she had to hear at that moment. I was with her through the whole process. I was helping her as much as I can, but I think it was the daughter that gave her the light and said that that grief needs to be looked at differently. And for a 3-year old to have that type of wisdom or understanding that her father is no longer here, but in another space that's better, to understand that there's a heaven, to understand that there's a place of um, another place of going and you'll feel better, was amazing. And I even asked her, "Did you speak to your daughter about this or tell her anything?" She said no. She never spoke to her about death and never spoke to her about heaven.
Wow.
So we don't know where she picked it up, because nobody else in the family would have spoken to her about this. And it just came from within her, a 3-year-old. I think she must have
Wow.
been 3.5, but this conversation just happened to her, and this little girl is a miracle girl too. So if I give you a little about that girl's mom's journey, and I don't think she would mind me talking about this, but she had gone through so many miscarriages to have this child. So she was grieving each time she had that miscarriage, because she had her hopes high and everything, and the miscarriage happened, and it just devastated her. So her mother went through multiple devastations, and I think it must have been over maybe 8 times that she tried and it didn't happen. But when she realigned and we spoke, and I think she also miscarried once when we spoke, when it was going to happen. And then I said, okay, let's use different tools now to say that we're not going to make this be something that is going to be um, another miscarriage. And we worked on those tools, and then this beautiful sunshine came out. But mind you, this sunshine, when she came out, she was a baby that cried nonstop. And the mom was at her wit's end at that time too. And she's like, "Oh my God, what's wrong? The doctors are saying nothing is wrong. She's not teething. She's just crying all the time and stuff like that." So I said, "She's not crying. She's talking to you. She's somebody who's gonna keep on giving you these words of wisdom. You're just not understanding. And she wants your attention. And she's like, I'm there with her. I'm saying yes, but I think the way you're communicating, but watch this kid is special." And it's been about a year and a half, I guess, or 2 years since the passing of her husband. And she's like, so the mom's telling me, "I don't feel like I'm the mom. I kind of feel like my daughter's the mom and I'm the child, and I keep on learning from her." And they've used their grief that they went through in such a special way of honoring her father on the birthdays or honoring the time he's passed. So I think it's so wholesome and beautiful um, to see that we keep on getting wisdom from different places that we never know it's going to come from, and that also helps us to get to another place where we could feel good. But again, grief isn't something we should run away from. It's also something that we should have a healthy conversation about. Um, Sometimes you feel the pain and you never unfeel the pain, and sometimes it's just a hollowness. Um, I know my mom uh, and my dad had a beautiful love story, and um, I would do anything to have that love story as my thing. I mean, they just had beautiful love for each other. And with him passing, I know how devastated the whole family was. My sister, my brother, my mom, we were all very devastated. But I know how hard it was for my mom because he was her light. He was her life. He was the reason for her to get up and make tea or get up and do anything. She just felt so dedicated, and he was so dedicated to her too. Um, they had this understanding between both of them. And I think that since dad's passed, that mom kind of feels like that she doesn't have her person, though she has kids, she has grandkids have happened post my dad's passing. She has all that, but I still don't think she has that feeling of saying it's I have my person. And I think she thinks about him every day. She probably speaks about him every day. I speak about him every day too. I don't shy away from talking about my father, but I don't talk about just the just the passing of that. I talk about the other things about my father, things that I've learned from him. And even if I'm listening to a favorite song, I say, "Oh my God, this is my dad's favorite song," or I'm eating something, I was like, "Oh my God, this is my dad's favorite thing." But that's how dad still became part of my language, and dad is still part of my love language, and dad is still part of my philosophy. So he lives on within me, and after me, he'll live on with others that are in our family that will speak about him fondly. But grief, I really feel that if you are going through that process and you don't know how to handle it, and you're not finding those um, kindred spirits around you to be, you're helping God. Again, Alex is there, I'm there, and we've helped many people to go through this. And I think sometimes uh, if it's not a family member, a friend, sometimes you got to go reach out to somebody that can help you and look at a new perspective on how to do things and feel things. And don't run away from it. Never run away from it. Embrace it. See it head on. Experience it. It's it's a it's a part of us that is so hard to even let go of. And I wish somebody was there to tell me that that emptiness you're feeling right now isn't something that needs to be filled. There's no journey and destination of feeling better from this. Feel it, understand it, then honor the person, rejoice the person, think about the person fondly, and do things in your daily or monthly or yearly to make sure that you honor that special someone. And now when it comes to yourself, and you're thinking about yourself, and when you're grieving about parts of you, honor the best parts of that version of you and not the version that was the bad pattern, or that made you traumatic. Honor that version of you. And when I talk about that, that's also, we do that anyways automatically, right? We went through our teenage, we went through when we were kids, we go through little stages in our life and we move forward, right? Like, we think about the things that we used to do as a kid, and we reminisce and smile about it. So that's the thing, that as we move forward, we keep on evolving also, and parts of us do change. And friendships also. We might have had friends who are best friends like 10 years ago or 12 years ago or even 5 years ago or a year ago, and we don't speak to them anymore. Honor that relationship. Think about the relationship, the best parts of that relationship. Honor it, and also grieve it. Grieve, feel sad about it, feel angry about it, and use things to help you through it. If you feel angry and you feel upset, maybe you need to go boxing and just kind of do a physical activity to get it out. Or maybe you need to get some sort of solace and some sort of peace. Then maybe you need to go and do some painting or sit in nature, or maybe some pottery class just to feel a little bit more better. But while you're in those aspects, think about the thing that you're grieving and utilize that as the healing tool to make yourself understand that this is just a part of your life. And this is not something that needs to destroy you. and overwhelm you. It's a thing that you are supposed to feel sad about. It's a thing that you're supposed to feel um, uh, uneasy about too, but don't run away from it. I hope this is helpful.
It is so helpful. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people, as you said, like a lot of people listening who could resonate with this, who've experienced grief. And I think there's a lot that can be taken away from everything you've shared.
Yeah, I think even when we're going through a process of saying losing a job or losing a loved one who's in the hospital, and you know that they're that idea of hope and faith, we kind of lose it at times, right? Because you see them deteriorating. At that moment, you start thinking about, okay, how do I bring peace to that person? Or how do I bring peace to that work or that job or whatever it is? I have to bring peace. So most people, one of the people that I was talking about when they were going through their loss of their father, I was in a conversation with them on chat and just saying, you know what, maybe chant this when you're around, like this, do this chant. Those chants were not about saving his life, but it was more about bringing peace within and also bringing peace to that person's soul and making them have a peaceful way of either recovering or exiting and saying, hey, I want to go on to my next journey. But that's that's the way that I look at it, that I feel that when we are lucky enough to still be there, and we know that the journey is going to be a journey of death, that we can do things to just bring in peace, not only for that person's soul, but also for our souls, and come to a place. And yes, you're going to cry about it. You're going to be upset about it, but you're also going to give yourself that empathy and compassion that you need at that moment. And I will say this again: feel what you need to feel in your moment, and don't hold on to it and say I need to be strong to say I will feel it much later. Feel it at that moment. Do what you need to do at that moment emotionally. Allow yourself to sense it, feel it, and embrace it. Even though it's going to be hard, even though it's going to be tough, you have to embrace that. It's that fear that keeps on making us say no, we have to be strong. And people say you need to be strong. You need to be strong for your mother. You need to be strong for your father. You need to be strong for your siblings. You need to be strong for your wife, or you need to be strong for your husband. There's always this idea of you need to be strong. And I'm just going to say this: you're already strong. You don't need to be anything. You just have to be in that moment, and make sure that you allow yourself, and I'm talking about grief here, you allow yourself to get that emotional feeling out there, and it's okay. Um, it's one of the most challenging things we face as humans, and um, it's a part of life that most people don't want to speak about, and they don't want to have that conversation. And I feel that the more conversations we have about this, the better. Alex, do you have any questions about grief?
I don't think I do. I don't think I do. I guess one question I would ask you would be, what would be the best practices for someone who's processing grief? What would you recommend?
So I think a person that's processing grief, um, most of the time it's a singular thing. It's something that you deal with yourself, and you need to deal with it yourself. There could be other people who are dealing with the same grief at the same time,
Right.
for a loved one, and you will try to make them feel better and make them not cry and stuff like that. Allow them to go through their process. You go through your process. I would say the tools that I would use also is about thinking about honoring their life. Think about what they did in their life, what they would want you to do right now. Think about those things. Don't think about the body being there, or the loss of a job, or the loss of oneself. Don't think about those things, because that is one moment of that journey. that's not the main moment of the journey, is it? It's not the main, it wasn't the main moment for my father's journey. Just one of the moments for my father's journey. And then his journey turned into something else. I think that we focus on the last thing we remember, and we don't focus on the, and in that moment, we don't have that chance, right? It's something that we're going through. We've got all these different overwhelming feelings. You get feelings of like, oh my God, who am I going to talk to? Oh my God, what am I going to do for money? What am I going to do for this? There could be so many things, right? It could be the person who's the breadwinner of the family, and they're the person that has the job, and you may be a homemaker, or you may be a partner that's maybe not at the same bracket as this person. So there's a lot of things that go in your head. I remember when I was going through my father being in the hospital, that we had family members that came and that were talking to us about money issues. And I was like, do you think this is the most appropriate time to talk about this? Like, why are we speaking about this right now? We've got something much bigger than this. And that family member was just, it was sad because we felt like that was one of the closest family members my father had. And with the conversation that happened, it didn't feel that way anymore, because then it just kind of felt like my father was just a necessity. Like my father was something that was an object. Right? He wasn't an emotional human. It wasn't the emotional side. This became something that was materialistic, and it didn't make me or my family feel any better about the situation. It actually dampened things even more, that we didn't have the support we needed at that time. And yes, sometimes it's important to have somebody to say, hey, this is what we need to do financially for support, to help, to make things happen. That's okay. But if it's the opposite of saying, well, this money has to come from here, and you have to pay this, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, then that's a problem. It doesn't help. It doesn't help you in your process. So what I would do is, when you're going through your process, feel what you need to feel, have the people around you that you know that are going to make you make your bubble the best support bubble that you can have, and then reminisce, think about the beautiful sides of it, even if it's a person or if it's a job. Remember the great moments within the job that you had, the things, the accolades you did, the things you did great. I mean, if I use Alex as an example again, because she's my favorite example to use, is that when she left her primary school teaching, there must have been moments of joy that Alex felt while she was in that school, be Absolutely. It with other teachers or be it with the students that she had. She must have had many of these wise little students that would say things that made her go, wow, that's amazing that they even think this way. And those are the parts that we remember, and those are the parts that we cherish, and those are the parts we make a part of our legacy. We don't make the parts that hurt us a part of our legacy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The parts Absolutely. That hurt us, we don't make part of our legacy. So now maybe the question is, well, if your dad died, then that hurt you. It did hurt me. But my dad's death is always going to be a part of my legacy. I can't change that, because I've changed his death into something that was devastating for me to something of enlightenment, and using it in conversations with people to inspire them, to make them feel better, to understand. And he's been part of my healing practice since I've started. And I also, after every session that I do with a person, I may not speak about my father, but I feel like he's looking down and saying, I'm happy you're doing this. I'm happy you're helping people. I am happy you're helping people feel better, to change their perspective, to get to a better place. And I know that that's one of his attributes while he was alive, that he would help people. And but not the way that I do it, but differently. Like, friends would come and they wanted their advice. So he used to give advice. people would need money, he'd give them money. I mean, he was just such a giving person. And I believe that some of those traits of him are part of my DNA, and that's why I'm the way I am. And it's part of my sister's DNA. It's part of my brother's DNA. It's part of my grandkids' DNA. It's part of all my different family members' DNA, because that inspires us. But does this make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Well,
All
Dan,
right.
thank you so much for being on the show again. You always have so much inspirational stories to tell and wisdom. And I know that everyone listening, especially those that are going through a grief journey right now, will probably take so much from this.
Yeah, I think as Alex and I have spoken about this many times, is sometimes a word is so heavy that there's this ideology of that we have to behave this way or become this because this is what this word means. But take grief and look at grief and say, hey, grief is not something that I need to be scared about, not something that I have to be I have to shun away, or I have to just be happy and be positive. No, feel the grief. Feel the grief, feel who you are, and remember and reminisce. Reminisce about the good. Reminisce about the good feelings. Reminisce about the good moments. Reminisce about that. And also remember, I kind of feel like grief can be a superpower. I feel like it's my superpower.
Love that. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Alex. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and lots of love to everybody. And thank you again. I really felt that this was something that needed to be spoken about right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sober Yoga Girl podcast. This community wouldn't exist without you here, so thank you. It would be massively helpful if you could subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast so it can reach more people. If we haven't met yet in real life, please come get your 1-week free trial of the Sober Girls Yoga membership and see what we're all about. Sending you love and light wherever you are in the world.